Imagine having like an expert medical consultant right there with you, someone who could actually chat through symptoms and even look at images like scans or lab results.
Yeah, it sounds pretty futuristic almost.
Doesn't it? It feels cutting edge.
It absolutely does. And the potential for AI to genuinely assist in fields like medicine, which are just so complex and critical,
Yeah,
it's huge.
it really is. Could improve speed, maybe accuracy, access too.
Exactly. And that potential is kind of what we're focusing on today. We're looking closely at an AI agent called AMI, which is designed for exactly that, clinical conversations and helping with diagnosis.
Right, and we found the details we're discussing on the AI Agent Store website. It's a resource we often check out. Really useful for seeing what AI agents are actually being built.
Yeah, it helps you get a sense of, the practical applications, where things are heading beyond just the theory.
You see real examples. So, okay, for this dive, our goal is pretty straightforward. Let's unpack what this material tells us about AMI. What is it? How's it built? How does it work?
And critically, how does it perform? What could it be used for, and where does it stand right now?
All right, let's get into it then. AMI. What exactly is it based on the info we have?
So it's described primarily as a multimodal AI diagnostic agent.
Multimodal. That sounds important.
It is, because its core function isn't just text, right? It's designed to have these clinical conversations and interpret medical images to actually help with the diagnosis.
Okay, so integrating different types of information. And who's behind it? The material mentions Google Research and DeepMind.
Yep, some heavy hitters in the AI space. And technically, it's built on the Gemini 2.0 Flash model.
Ah, okay. So that gives us a clue about the underlying language power it has.
Definitely.
So how does something like this actually function in a diagnostic conversation? The material points out a few key capabilities. First, obviously engaging in the medical dialogue itself.
Right, the conversation piece. But what's really interesting is what they call the state-aware reasoning framework.
State aware. What does that mean practically?
Well, think of it like this. It's not just following some script. It actually adapts its responses based on how the conversation is going, the information you provide,
Uh-huh.
just like a human doctor would adjust their questions depending on your answers. Yeah.
That makes sense. That adaptability feels crucial for a real clinical interaction. And then there's that multimodal bit again. The info says it can intelligently request, interpret, and reason about visual medical data.
Yeah, this is where it goes beyond just words. The examples they give are things like skin photos, ECGs, even lab results.
So it doesn't just passively receive them.
No, it seems it's designed to actively incorporate them into its diagnostic process right within the conversation. It might ask for an image if it thinks it's needed.
Okay, so all these pieces, the conversation, the state awareness, the image interpretation, they work together to boost its diagnostic ability.
That's the goal, yeah, to make the assessment more comprehensive than just, say, relying on described symptoms.
So how did it actually do when they tested it? The source mentions objective structured clinical examinations, OSCEs.
Right, OSCEs. For anyone who's not familiar, those are basically standardized, simulated patient visits. They use them all the time in medical training to test skills in a controlled way.
And the results described sound, well, pretty striking.
They do. They compared AMIE against primary care physicians, and the material states AMIE performed comparably, or in some cases, better than the physicians in specific things like diagnostic accuracy.
Better. Wow.
Yeah, and also in interpreting that multimodal data, and even communication skills.
Okay, that's a big claim. In AI performing on par or better than human doctors in simulated tests for things like communication, that suggests some real potential here.
It definitely points towards something potentially transformative, even if it's still early days. And related to that, the material talks about its reasoning having high autonomy, specifically within these diagnostic chats.
High autonomy. What does that look like for Amy? How does it achieve that?
Well, based on the description, it seems to stem from a few things. One is that ability to intelligently ask for and use the visual data we talked about.
Oh.
Another is using what they call agentic reasoning. Basically, it tries to figure out what information it still lacks based on its current level of diagnostic uncertainty, and then optimize its responses to get that info.
So it's kind of thinking strategically about the conversation?
Sort of, yeah. And it was also trained in a simulated environment where it essentially practiced these dialogues against itself, refining its approach.
Ah, that self-play training makes sense for something this complex. But it is crucial to remember, like the source says, it's still a research system.
Absolutely. Human oversight is implied in these tests. It's not like it's practicing medicine independently out there.
Right, not yet anyway. So given these capabilities and the test results, What are the potential uses the material suggests?
Several specific ones are listed. First, helping clinicians with diagnostic reasoning, almost like a sophisticated assistant or sounding board.
A smart second opinion, kinda.
Exactly. Also, interpreting that visual medical data within the dialogue, playing directly to his multimodal strength.
And then enhancing patient care through potentially accurate and empathetic support. That empathy part is interesting, tying back to the communication results.
It is. And finally, it mentions supporting medical education through simulated conversations. Makes total sense given it was tested using OSCEs, right?
Hmm.
It could be a really powerful training tool.
Yeah, you can see that. Now, what about its current status? Access.
Well, the material's pretty clear. It's a research system, needs more validation, more testing before any real-world use.
Standard, but important caveat for this kind of tech.
Definitely. Regarding access info provided, it's listed as having a free pricing model currently.
Okay. Free. And the code itself.
That's noted as closed source.
Got it. And the industries linked to it are pretty obvious. Healthcare, medical research, AI.
Makes sense. And the tags highlight its key features. Diagnostic AI, multimodal reasoning, clinical conversations, image interpretation, state-aware framework, all the stuff we've been talking about.
The source material also touches on community opinions, mentioning insights from places like Reddit.
Yeah, and it shares some specific positive points apparently found there. Like AMIE's standalone diagnostic performance in the tests actually exceeded unassisted clinicians with significantly better top 10 accuracy scores.
So, meaning it was really good at getting the correct diagnosis somewhere in its top 10 guesses. That backs up the main evaluation findings.
Right. And it also notes that when clinicians used AMI as an assistant, they actually produced more comprehensive lists of possible diagnoses compared to working alone.
So it seems like a potentially valuable collaborator, not just a standalone thing.
That's what the positive comments suggest, yeah. It's worth pointing out, though, the source does say accessing any negative community feedback requires premium access, so we're just relaying the positive points that were explicitly shared in the material we reviewed.
Fair enough. The source also mentions, just briefly, that the platform allows comparing AMI with other agents. It lists Interview AI as an example. We didn't do a comparison, but it's a feature available there.
Yeah, seeing different approaches side by side can be really insightful for understanding the landscape.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together. Our look at the material on AME shows us this multimodal AI agent, definitely demonstrating significant promise, particularly in medical diagnosis and potentially education, too.
Yeah, based on the evaluations described, its knack for handling both conversation and visual data seems like a pretty notable development for AI in healthcare.
Absolutely. But, and it's a big but, we have to keep its current status front and center. The info stresses it's still firmly in the research camp, needs much more validation before it's anywhere near actual clinical practice.
Still, understanding agents like AME, even at this stage, really helps you grasp the possibilities opening up. You know, how AI might reshape parts of healthcare diagnosis, training, maybe even patient interactions down the line.
It certainly does, and it leaves us with a pretty big thought to chew on, doesn't it? Given what we've seen about Amy's performance in these simulations, balanced against its current research limitations, how do we actually envision that future balance between these incredibly powerful AI tools and the, frankly, irreplaceable human element, the judgment, the empathy, the holistic care that doctors and nurses provide?
That is the critical question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And one we'll likely be grappling with for a long time as this tech evolves.
Definitely something to keep thinking about. If you're curious and want to explore AME or other agents further, the information we discussed can be found via aiagentstore.ai.
Thanks for tuning in for this dive.
And as always, thank you for rating the show.